Welcome back to another reading and correcting of Bottom Rung with me, Kendar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. Today we are doing chapter 38. The commotion drew Tibs out of the inn along with Commodore. Jackal was with Krosef doing their thing. Mez was at the archery field, and Kirino was off reading, Tip suspected by how evasive she'd been when he'd asked what she intended to do with the rest of the day. A tall woman in green and red and gold glared down her nose at Harry. He simply stared back at her. Runners were watching from along the buildings, while the townsfolk changed direction on noticing the group. With her were four others, one of whom Tibbs recognized as the man who'd wanted to know how they had defeated the boss. Except for him, they all looked like fighters. One was holding his arm against his One was holding his arm against his stomach. "How dare you touch one of my servants?" she shrilled at Harry. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "You're a runner, just like the rest of them," Harry replied with disdain. "The fact you paid to be here doesn't mean you get to ignore my rules." "Your rules?" she sneered. "I do not obey a man. I am Lady Cabela of Sentinel. I am first of the third matriarch. Next in line to rule the holding of Desmarais, sister to the High Lady of Oh, wow. This is what happens when you leave me coming up with names. Sister of the High Lady of Praditfar, who is cousin to the Queen Feriel herself," she huffed at the fighter. "You done?" Harry demanded. "Am I done?" She didn't seem to know how to react to the question. "Yeah, or do you intend on prowling more line of meaningless lineage?" "Meaningless?" Her voice rose high enough Tibbs winced in pain. "I am—" She froze in place, light coming out of her open mouth. Tibbs saw her strain to move, her eyes growing wide in fear. "You're lucky I can't just throw you in a cell or beat the shit out of you for trying to pull this rank bullshit on me. This rank bullshit with me." The man to the woman's right took took a step forward, pulling a sword out of his scabbard, and Harry's hand swung at him. It was nowhere close to touching, but there was a flash of light, and the man in flew across the road and hit a building, then crumpled to the ground. "But you pull a sword on me," Harry said, smiling, "and things change." Emotion to the unconscious man, and three guards in green and black moved out from the crowd to pull him to his feet and drag him away. "Don't expect to see him any time soon," he told the woman. Now, even nobles were assembled, staying apart from the other runners. Harry looked around and nodded. "Okay, looks like enough of you are here, so listen up. There are rules, my rules, and they are not to be broken. Those of you who paid to be here were told what they are." He fixed his gaze on the immobile woman. Tibbs thought the light was seeping through her clothing. "If you weren't, take it up with them. One of those rules is that no one discusses what takes place in the dungeon outside of it. I know that before I took charge, the enforcement of those rules wasn't exactly important. I'm here now, so you are going to keep your mouth shut." He raised a hand and pushed it toward the woman, who moved back, her feet making furrows in the packed earth the packed earth of the street. "You can consider yourself lucky. All I'm allowed to do is send you back to that comfortable bed in whatever city you call home, because you should see what's going to happen to the team that told you how they beat the floor boss." He walked, following her. No, guiding her, Tibbs realized. Somehow, Harry was using his light essence not only to hold her still, but to move her against her will. Tibbs followed them, along with most of the runners, old and new. He was curious what he was going to do with her. Her servants stayed by her as she moved backward, two looking like they were trying to figure out how to stop her, and the third, the man who'd spoken with Tibbs' team, only walking backwards, eyes on Harry, hand inside his sleeve, and Tibbs was certain the man was a thief. "Anyone who is caught talking about the dungeon outside of it will be punished," Harry said. "For you, Conscripts, that means a cell. Then some labor to make you understand the importance of the rules. For you paying members, you're going home and will never return to this dungeon. Get back in line for the right to pay to enter one of the other dungeons. I'm sure you have enough coins to get a spot in your lifetime. The man shoved his hand at her and she flew back, landing and stumbling, then tripping on the stairs leading up the transport platform. One of her servants caught her before she fell and helped her straighten, only to be pushed away as she squared her shoulder. You do not get to. Harry raised a glowing hand and she stopped, closing her mouth. I'm giving you the honor of walking up those stairs. Argue with me and I'm going to throw you up them. It's your decision. Either way, you're going up them and they're taking you away. She stared at him, her lips tight, trembling with anger. This is not over. She spat and walked up the steps. Once her three servants were at her side, one of the attendants in golden robe stepped to them, looked at Harry, who gave a nod, and they vanished in. This is no longer golden light. In a show of multicolored lights. Harry turned to face the crowd. Any conscript who had talked with one of the nobles about the dungeon, you have until the roaster goes up in the morning to come tell me. If you do, all you get is a week in the cell. You, not your entire team. It means they'll miss this week's run, but they won't be completely out. I'll even sweeten the deal and not demand that you hand over whatever they paid you for the information, because it's not you I want to be rid of. You don't. If you don't, once I find out, your entire team will share your punishment. He paused, looked them over. Tibbs expected the man to slow when his gaze passed on him, but if he noticed Tibbs, he didn't acknowledge it. And because I expect you all think you can get away with this, I'll remind you that the light reaches into the darkest shadows to expose the truth. He walked away. He walked back the way they'd come without waiting for a response. Tibbs turned to Comdar to get his thought and answer questions the cleric might have about Harry and what had transpired, but the man was gone. Tibbs looked for him in the crowd, but finally decided Comdar had left to do his own thing. So that's better than I thought, Jekyll said, looking at the writing on the wall that had been turned into the board for the order in which the team would go in. Where Carina stopped his arm before he pointed at one of the names. Tibbs, where are we? Jekyll rolled his eyes. Is it really the time to ask him about his letters? Tibbs began scanning the board. It was divided into 9 columns with 12 lines, but only 8 in each column had writing in them. But only 8 in each column had writing on it. Jekyll had shown him both their names over the previous times there had been a list, so he'd be able to recognize them even when they were written slightly. Jekyll had shown him both their names. The previous times there had been a list, so he'd be able to recognize them even when they were written slightly differently. He'd explained only scribes were able to always write the letters in the same way. Everyone else who knew their letters did it in a similar, but not exact way. Did it in a similar, but not exact, but not the same way. You said you taught him his name, right? Kirina asked, only with a hint of suspicion. Why would I look for my name? Tibbs asked when what she said made its way through his concentration of identifying the first shape of Jackal's name. Did you think Jackal was going to claim the team as his own? Miss asked. But he's the leader. Jackal snorted. It's still your team, Tibbs. It's our team, Tibbs stated, with your name attached to it, Jackal said. Tibbs looked at the board again. He had to start over. He paused and looked at the fighter suspiciously. It's just my name, right? It's Tibs' team, Jekyll said. I don't know how to make out our team on there. Just find your name, Kierna said. She looked at Jekyll. You did get him to practice, right? I took him to each listing, but it isn't like there were a lot of after we became a team. There was one, then we met you, and after that the dungeon closed, and now there is this. So he practiced as much as he could. Jekyll smiled proudly. Tibbs focused on the board. The first shape of his name was distinctive, but it wasn't the only name with it. Then it was small. There would be a space between the two words. He placed his fingers under the fourth line with writing in the third column, then looked at it closer. The person had written the letters with a little space between them, which made counting them easier. His name had 4 letters in it, and the last one was what Jackal called the snake. Before that was the pregnant woman, then the tree with the sun over it. This one. See? Jackal said proudly. Good, Karina said. How do you know that where that puts us on the roster? How? Tibbs bit back the annoyance. Karina was trying to help him understand more. He couldn't do that without trying things he hadn't done before. It was like when Alistair told him what he could do but not how, because working on it was on his own was better. He hoped she wasn't going to do that for the letters, because remembering what his name looked like with Jackal's help had been hard enough. 9 columns with 12 lines, with only 8 names, but only 8 had names. He knew each name was a team, and that teams went in one at a time, one after the other. So they would go in fourth, and the columns had to be the days. On the third day, we're going to be the fourth team going in. That hadn't been as hard as he thought. How many teams are in total? She asked him. Those are numbers, he protested, but she only smiled. He looked at the board again, grumbling. Who names numbers anyway? He took a breath. He knew 8, and he knew 9. There were only 10 in each column. If there were 10 in each column, that would make it 9-0. But there were only 8. That meant the number went down. How much? 2 for each column. How is he going to do this? If he looked at the line instead of the column, he only had to deal with adjusting by 1 per line. So 8 lines was 8-0. If he took 1, it became 7-9. Then 7-8, then 7-6. He tapped a line for each one. 7-2, he said. That's a different way of saying. That is an odd way of saying it. That is an odd way of saying it, Kumdar said. But he's right, Mez said, counting on his fingers. I think. I was never good with those kind of numbers. Multiplications, Kirina said. And yes, you're right, Tibbs. They have 72 teams spread over 9 days. Except 6 have been removed, Kumdar said. 3 nobles and 3 conscript. Can you not call us that? Miss asked. We're runners, even if we were forced into it. My apologies. Only one is before us. The cleric tapped a name in the second column. Someone named Jeff. Do you think... do you think they will move us ahead? It's only 1 slot on the same day, Checo said. So I don't think it matters much. We'll just have to pay attention in case they do. Don't tell us, and we'll just have to pay attention in case they do. Don't tell us, and then claim we lost our spot because we weren't there. Would they do that? Kumdar asked. Yes, they all said at the same time. Can you even fight? Kirina asked as Jackal and Kumdar pulled a bent and rusted sword out of a box on the edge of the training field. You're a cleric. Don't do you not know other clerics? Kumdar replied, taking one and extended his hand with it as Jackal showed him. Purity clerics don't have to fight. They have other members of their team to protect them. We'll protect you, Tibs said. I appreciate that. I do appreciate that. But Jackal is right. In the dungeon, if I cannot help the team, I will be a hindrance. I must admit that I have used guile to get out of most trouble I have found myself in until now. And here you are, Jekyll said. And here you are, Jekyll said. Here anyway. The cleric smiled, lowering his arm. Here I am. I do not think a sword is for me. At least, not if I am to be helpful in this next run. I am not physical. Jekyll nodded. So something light. How about a knife? No, Tip said. Why not? The fighter replied. It's nice, light, and he can throw it if needed. Tibbs approached. The dungeon eats anything we throw now, remember? All right. But why are you against me using... Very well. But why do you object to me using a knife? Tibbs grinned and crossed his arm over his chest. Touch me! The cleric raised an eyebrow, and Tibbs continued looking at him. You're going to want to humor him, I think, as said. He's the one who uses knives, so whatever he wants to prove is probably a good thing. Commodore shrugged and reached a hand toward Tibbs, but he quickly stepped aside and behind the cleric. The men turned. I am not sure I understand. That's because you haven't touched me. Tibbs, Jekyll called, trust me on this. It's a lot simpler if you just ask him to bed you then. Tibbs glared at the fighter. Glared at the fighter to see... Tibbs glanced at the Tibbs glanced at the fighter to see Karina shaking her hand. What was that for? Tibbs stepped aside as Karina reached for him, as Commodore reached for him. Don't you think he's a little young for that kind of talk? Like shaking the pain out of her hand. There we go. That's going to be clearer. Tibbs led the cleric around their corner of the field, always staying within reach, then stepping away. He put Jekyll and Karina out of his mind. There was no danger in this, but to make his point, he couldn't accidentally have Commodore succeed. After 10 minutes, the cleric was sweating, but he had a determined expression on his face. Tibbs suspected the man understood what he was getting at, but wanted to prove him wrong. It wouldn't happen. He was slowing down, and even with barely moving, Tibbs avoided being touched. When the clerics came at him again, instead of stepping away, he stepped into the attack, still avoiding it, and pressed the tip of his fingers under the man's jaw. My trainer uses a knife when he does this, but I think you understand that you're dead now. Commodore nodded, panting. The knife needs speed and being quick on your feet, Tip said, repeating Bardic's word. Ideally, you want to strike before your enemy even knows you're there, but the dungeon knows everything, so you have to be quick. I have had my share of running, Commodore said, to keep my freedom, but never in this manner. Never in this manner. The bow, then? Mez offered. Commodore raised his hand. No. I would not be any... I would... I am not good with it. Like the sword, I do not have the time to gain the strength or accuracy. That leaves you with your fists, Jekyll said, but that has both the problems of Tibbs's knife and the sword have. You have to get close and you have to be strong. Not to say tough enough to make the blows. Not to say tough enough to take blows or quick enough not to get hit. I go the tough route, if there's any doubt. No, you make that quite clear, Karina said. It seems that I am relegated to being a hindrance if my element does not prove useful. Catch! Someone said, and Tibs turned, knife in hand. Commodore wasn't quite as fast and fumbled with what landed against his chest. In his peripheral vision, Tibs saw Mez had an arrow notched and pointed at the new arrival. Jekyll was covered in earth, and leaves danced in the air around Karina. Do me a favor, Tibs, Bardic said. Tell your friends I'm inoffensive. He isn't, Tibs said, but he's someone I know. He's who's teaching me how to fight with a knife. By stabbing you with one? Kandar asked, holding the staff in his hand. It's proven effectively in motivating Tibs. For some odd reason, he doesn't like being poked or cut. It's called common sense, Kirina said. Bardic snapped his finger. Exactly. Do you need to train me? Bardic smiled. It can wait. He pointed to the staff. That gives you some reach. You can use it to block, and it's light enough you won't tire yourself. You will want to buy something better, but good luck with finding someone selling them until you ask. Where did you get it, then? Where did you get it, then? Tib asked. Bardic smiled. Oh, you know me. I had this thing lying around, and since your friend needed it, it'll stop cluttering my space. Thank you, Kumdar said. But why? Like to like, cleric, Bardic said as he turned and walked away. Like to like. Bardic looked at them in confusion. Use darkness too, Tibs said. It had to be that, since Bardic wasn't a cleric. Do you think he's right? Kirina asked. Is that something you can use? The better question, Checo said, is if you're allowed to use it. Seems strange to me that's never been an option to use. There has to be a reason. Rote, Tib said. More to himself, Bardic hadn't used a knife, so did Alistair. Every rogue runner, with a few exceptions, used one. Bardic had told him it was because he didn't have the time to train in being stronger until he'd have to go into. He didn't have. Okay. Bardic had told him it was because he didn't have the time to train to get stronger before he'd have to go in the dungeon, and that had been true then, but it wasn't anymore. He had the time now, if he wanted. What do you mean? Kirina asked. My teacher, Alistair, said there's a lot the guild does because it's always been done that way, even if they don't remember why. I think it's like that. Rogue have knives, fighters have swords, archers bows and arrows, sorcerer magic. I don't use a sword, Jekyll said, and I'm not much of an archer without my bow. Tibbs nodded. And Don's rogue uses a short sword instead of a knife, but you two are the exceptions. The box had. Tibbs pointed. The box has what they train fighters with, and its only sword. Stories talk of adventures with hammers, spears, and all kind of weapons, but here they only train you with swords. Why? Because it's the best. Because it's the best? Kirina asked. Tib shrugged. Could be. It's just occurred to me it was strange, like the staff. Maybe at other dungeons they train people differently, Jekyll said. Are you going to use that? He asked. Commodore tested the weight, spun, and dropped it. I think I will. It feels more comfortable than the sword, and with it, I think I could touch Tibbs. Tibbs snorted. No, you can't. Commodore shoved the tip of the staff in Tibbs' direction, and he took off running. He waved behind him as an exasperated Kirina yelled after him. And this concludes chapter 38 of Bottom Rung. If you're enjoying this, subscribe, hit the bell, hit the thumbs up, and share. If you want to read the story, it is on Royal Road. The link is in the notes, along with a link to my Patreon should you want to support me. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.